What happens when a corrupt cop and a biased judge try to ruin an innocent man's life, only to have their entire scheme blow up in court? Meet Jamal Henderson, a successful businessman who thought his biggest problem was a routine traffic stop. But little did he know, he was walking into a trap, a setup designed to destroy him. But when the truth comes out, it's not just Jamal who walks free. It's an entire system of corruption that gets exposed. Stick around, because this is the shocking story of how a man fought back against injustice and won. Before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe the channel so the community can grow and we can bring you more stories like this. Now, let's get into it. It was a cold Friday night in Jefferson City, the kind where streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks and the air carried the distant hum of car engines and late-night radio shows. Jamal Henderson, a 32-year-old business consultant, was driving home from a long day at work. His suit jacket rested in the passenger seat, and his tie was loosened just enough to let him breathe. He had just wrapped up a major presentation, and all he wanted was to get home, kick off his shoes, and maybe enjoy a glass of whiskey while watching the late-night sports recap. He never made it that far. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Jamal sighed. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. His taillights were working. He had checked them just last week. Still, he knew better than to argue. With careful movements, he signaled and pulled over. A patrol car rolled to a stop behind him. Moments later, heavy boots crunched against the pavement. The officer approached with an air of authority, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness and landing directly on Jamal's face. "License and registration," the officer barked. Jamal kept his hands visible. "Sure thing, officer." Slowly, he reached for the glove compartment, retrieving the documents. "Can I ask why I'm being stopped?" The cop, a thick-set man with a buzz cut and a sneer, barely glanced at the paperwork. His badge read, Officer Daniels. "Step out of the car." Jamal frowned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daniels snapped. "Step out." Jamal clenched his jaw. He could feel it, the way this was going. He had seen it before. Still, he did as he was told, carefully exiting the vehicle, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Daniels circled him like a predator. "You match the description of a robbery suspect," he said, though there was no conviction in his voice. Jamal's pulse quickened. "I just left work. I've been in meetings all day." "Hands on the hood." Jamal inhaled sharply. "Officer, this isn't right." That was all it took. Daniels grabbed him, slamming him face first against the car. A sharp pain shot through Jamal's cheek as cold metal cuffs clamped onto his wrists. "Resisting arrest," Daniels taunted. "Big mistake, buddy." Jamal gritted his teeth, his heart hammering. This wasn't just an arrest. This was something else. Something worse. The second cop, a lanky officer named Reynolds, approached with a plastic bag in his hand. Daniels smirked. "Well, well, what do we have here?" He held up the bag, white powder inside. Jamal's stomach dropped. "That's not mine," he said, voice steady but laced with rage. Daniels grinned. "Sure it isn't." As the handcuffs tightened, Jamal realized this was a setup, and it was only the beginning. The ride to the station was silent except for the crackling of the police radio. Jamal sat in the back of the squad car, wrists sore from the too tight handcuffs, his mind racing. He had heard of stories like this, black men being framed, their lives destroyed by corrupt cops, but he never imagined he'd be living one. He forced himself to stay calm. "Think, Jamal. Think." The moment they arrived, Officer Daniels yanked him out of the car and marched him through the station like a trophy. A few officers barely glanced up, either indifferent or too used to this kind of scene. They processed him quickly. Mugshot, fingerprints, personal belongings taken. Then came the interrogation room, small, windowless, suffocating. A single metal table sat in the center, a flickering light overhead casting shadows against the pale walls. Jamal sat, fists clenched. Minutes later, Daniels strolled in, dropping a file onto the table with a smug grin. "Bad luck, Henderson," he said, sitting across from him. "Cops found drugs in your car. Guess that fancy job of yours doesn't pay enough, huh?" Jamal exhaled slowly. "You know damn well those aren't mine." Daniel shrugged. "Juries love a good story. A clean-cut businessman with a dark side? That sells." He leaned in, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Now, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Take a plea deal. 5 years, maybe less with good behavior." Jamal's stomach churned. A plea? They were railroading him, trying to make him confess to something he didn't do. His lawyer. He needed his lawyer. "I want to make my phone call." Daniel smirked, pushing the file closer. Sure. But first, why not read your options?" Jamal didn't touch it. Instead, he locked eyes with Daniels. "I'm not signing anything. I want my lawyer. Now." Daniel's smirk faltered. "You think your fancy attorney's gonna help you?" He scoffed, standing. "Good luck with that." He knocked twice on the door. It swung open and 2 officers entered. "Take him to holding." 3 days later, the court hearing. Jamal sat in the defendant's seat, his hands gripping the table. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, reporters, onlookers, and a jury that already looked skeptical. Across the room, Judge William Carter adjusted his glasses, watching Jamal with thinly veiled contempt. His reputation was well known. Harshest sentences for black defendants, friendliest rulings for cops. Beside him, the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Marshall, stood, pacing as she addressed the jury. "This case is clear-cut. The defendant was found with illegal substances in his vehicle. Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds, both decorated members of this department, have provided sworn statements. Ladies and gentlemen, the law is simple. Possession is possession." Jamal's attorney, Malik Thompson, leaned over. "Stay cool," he whispered. "This is rigged, but we're about to flip the script." Jamal straightened. He wasn't going down without a fight. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jamal sat with his back straight, his face unreadable, but inside, his blood boiled. Across the room, Officer Daniels sat confidently in the witness stand, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He was eating this up. The prosecutor, Linda Marshall, turned to him. "Officer Daniels, can you confirm for the jury what happened on the night of the arrest?" Daniels cleared his throat, putting on his best, just another hero doing his job face. "My partner and I observed the defendant driving erratically," he said, voice smooth and practiced. "We pulled him over as a precaution. Upon approaching the vehicle, I noticed he appeared nervous. That's when I asked him to step out." Jamal clenched his fists under the table. "He's lying." "We then conducted a routine search," Daniels continued, "and unfortunately, we discovered a bag of cocaine under the driver's seat." He shook his head, feigning disappointment. "It's always a shame to see someone throw their life away like that." The prosecutor nodded solemnly before turning toward the jury. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Carter glanced at Jamal's lawyer. "Defense may proceed." Malik Thompson rose from his seat, cool, unshaken. He strolled toward Daniels, adjusting his suit jacket as if he had all the time in the world. "Officer Daniels, you said you pulled over my client for driving erratically. Could you define erratic?" Daniels stiffened slightly. "He was switching lanes without signaling." "Ah," Malik nodded. "Did you record this incident on your dashboard camera?" Daniels hesitated. Number. The dash cam wasn't operational that night. "How convenient," Malik mused. He picked up a document from the defense table. "Now, you claim you found drugs under the driver's seat. You're absolutely sure about that?" Daniels smirked. 100%. Malik turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence a sworn affidavit from an independent forensic analyst." He walked over and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Carter. "What does this pertain to, Mr. Thompson?" the judge asked, flipping through the pages. "The analysis proves that my client's car was wiped down for fingerprints after his arrest. Strangely enough, not a single one of my client's prints were found on the bag of drugs." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Daniel shifted in his seat. "That doesn't mean anything," he scoffed. "He could have used gloves." Malik smirked. "Interesting theory. So, my client, a businessman with no criminal record, on his way home from work, plotted this elaborate scheme, just in case he got pulled over for switching lanes?" He turned to the jury. "Does that make sense to any of you?" Silence. Daniel's jaw tightened. Malik took a step closer. Time to drop the bomb. "Tell me, Officer Daniels, do you recall a traffic camera at the intersection where you pulled my client over?" Daniels blinked. "Traffic camera?" Malik grinned. "Yeah, the one that caught everything." A hush fell over the courtroom. Officer Daniels' confident smirk wavered for the first time. His fingers twitched against the armrest of the witness stand. The jury shifted in their seats, sensing the shift in energy. Malik Thompson let the silence hang, enjoying the weight of it. Then he walked back to the defense table, picked up a USB drive, and held it up. "This drive contains footage from a traffic camera at the exact location where Officer Daniels conducted his so-called routine stop." Judge Carter frowned. "Is this authenticated?" Malik nodded. "Absolutely, Your Honor. Submitted into evidence this morning. If the prosecution has no objections, I'd like to play it for the court." The prosecutor, Linda Marshall, hesitated. She had reviewed the case inside and out. There was no mention of traffic cam footage in the police report. "What was on that drive?" "Proceed," the judge said. A bailiff connected the USB to the courtroom screen. The video loaded, showing a grainy but clear black and white recording of the intersection. It was time-stamped 9:47 p.m., the exact time of the stop. The footage played. Jamal's car appeared, slowing to a stop at a red light. Perfectly normal driving, no swerving, no lane switching. Then, from the side of the frame, the squad car pulled up behind him, lights flashing. The courtroom watched in silence as Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds stepped out. Then came the real shock. Reynolds walked straight to the driver's side. Meanwhile, Daniels circled to the passenger's side, reached into his own pocket, and, clear as day, slipped a small plastic bag under the driver's seat. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone in the jury muttered, "No way." Judge Carter's face turned a deep shade of red. "Pause the video." The bailiff froze the screen, the image of Daniel's hand planting the evidence displayed in front of the entire courtroom. Malik turned back to Daniels, who looked as if he wanted to sink into the floor. "Care to explain what we're seeing here, officer?" Malik's voice was casual, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath it. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. Sweat gathered on his brow. This is taken out of context." Malik arched an eyebrow. "Oh? Please enlighten us. What possible context makes planting drugs in someone's car legal?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Carter slammed his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But the damage was done. Daniel shifted wildly in his seat, searching for an escape. The prosecutor, Linda Marshall, looked horrified. She had just staked her case on a corrupt cop. Malik turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Silence. Then, "Motion granted." The gavel's echo still hung in the air, but the courtroom was already in chaos. Gasps, whispers, and a few outright shouts filled the space as reporters scrambled to take notes, cameras flashed, and members of the jury exchanged stunned glances. Jamal sat motionless for a second, his mind catching up to what had just happened. Dismissed. The weight of those words hit him like a tidal wave. He had walked into this courtroom expecting a battle for his life, and in just a few minutes, everything had flipped. But Malik wasn't finished. "Your Honor," he continued, stepping forward with controlled confidence, given the overwhelming evidence of misconduct, I'd also like to submit a formal motion for an internal affairs investigation into Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds. Daniels shot up from the witness stand. This is outrageous. That video could be doctored. This is... Sit down, officer. Judge Carter's voice was ice cold. For the first time, the mask of superiority he had worn since the trial began cracked. His fingers clenched around the gavel as if struggling to maintain control. Daniels hesitated, then slowly sank back into his seat. His face was no longer smug. It was pale. Judge Carter let out a slow breath and turned to the prosecutor. Miss Marshall, in light of this new evidence, does the state have any objections to an investigation? Marshall looked like she had swallowed a lemon. She hesitated just long enough to glance at the reporters furiously scribbling away. She could either back a crooked cop or save her own career. No objections, Your Honor, she said through gritted teeth. Judge Carter turned back to Malik, but his expression was unreadable. Your motion for dismissal is granted. Mr. Henderson, you are free to go. A rush of relief flooded Jamal's chest. The nightmare was over. Or so he thought. Because just as Malik began gathering his papers, Judge Carter did something unexpected. He stood up. Clearing his throat, he addressed the courtroom, not to the jury, not to the attorneys, but to the public. This case is an embarrassment to our justice system. His voice was sharp, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath it. The court will not tolerate officers who violate the public's trust. A full review of Officer Daniels and Officer Reynolds' conduct will be conducted. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. And let me be clear. Anyone found complicit in this corruption will be held accountable. Jamal's eyes narrowed. The words sounded righteous, just. But there was something off in the judge's tone. And then it hit him. Judge Carter wasn't angry about the corruption. He was angry that they got caught. And Jamal had a feeling. This wasn't over. The moment Jamal stepped out of the courthouse, the flashing cameras nearly blinded him. Mr. Henderson, how do you feel about the dismissal? Will you be pressing charges against the police department? Do you think this is a systemic issue? The reporters crowded in, but Malik quickly ushered Jamal past them. No comments for now, he said firmly. My client has been through enough. As they reached the courthouse steps, Jamal finally exhaled. He should have felt free. The charges were dropped, the truth was out, and Daniels was about to face the consequences of his corruption. But something still didn't sit right. Judge Carter's words replayed in his mind. The way he had tried to control the narrative, to distance himself from the scandal. And Daniels, he was crooked, no doubt, but a cop like him. He was just a foot soldier. Someone bigger had to be pulling the strings. Jamal turned to Malik. Something's wrong. Malik sighed. I know. Jamal's eyebrows shot up. Wait, you do? Malik's jaw tightened. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. I started looking into Carter the second I saw he was assigned to your case. The man has a history of ruling against black defendants at an unusual rate. His sentencing records? Off the charts. The problem? He's careful. He never leaves a trail. Jamal felt a chill. You think he's covering for more than just Daniels? Malik nodded. I think this goes way deeper. 1 week later, the real bombshell. Jamal wasn't the kind of guy to sit back and let things go. He wanted answers. So when an anonymous email landed in his inbox, subject Judge Carter's dirty secret, he knew he had to open it. Inside was a single attachment, a video file. Jamal clicked play. The footage was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. Judge Carter stood in an office, speaking with none other than Officer Daniels. You're getting sloppy, Carter snapped. Daniels scoffed. You think I wanted to plant that bag? You told me to handle it. Jamal's stomach twisted. Carter was in on it. Listen to me, Carter continued. This city runs on order. If we let people like Henderson slip through, others start thinking they can beat the system. We can't have that. Jamal's hands shook as the video ended. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger. He grabbed his phone, dialing Malik. "We have him." Malik picked up instantly. "Who?" "Judge Carter." A pause. Then, "Send me the file. We're taking him down." Jamal smiled for the first time in weeks. Because this time, they weren't just fighting back. They were about to burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. Jamal could have given up. He could have accepted defeat, signed a plea deal, and let a corrupt system destroy his future. But he didn't. Instead, he fought back with facts, patience, and the power of truth. And in the end, the very people who tried to frame him were the ones exposed. This story is a reminder that corruption thrives in silence, but justice prevails when the truth is brought to light. If someone tries to take advantage of you, don't panic. Stay smart, stay strong, and never stop fighting for what's right. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notification to be the first to know when interesting and lesson-packed stories like this one drop.